Welcome back to our video series on the book of Daniel. This is chapter 3. In our last video, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and saw a vision of an image where the head was of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet a mixture of iron and clay. However, King Nebuchadnezzar soon forgot who was in charge of kingdoms and nations. He forgot who sets up kings and rulers and who can bring them down. We also are just like the king, forgetting that our lives are in the hands of Jesus. We look to our bosses to give us a raise or to promote us, forgetting the fact that God can move upon hearts. We need to look to Jesus and ask Him and wait for Him to move as He sees best for our lives. It wasn't long after the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar was in a pitched battle for his throne. Someone was trying to take the throne away from him, and the conspirators got so close there was hand-to-hand battle in the palace. In some accounts, it seems that the king himself was involved in this hand-to-hand battle with the conspirators. After the conspirators were arrested and the conspiracy defeated, King Nebuchadnezzar required all leaders in his kingdom, from every land and nation, to give an oath of loyalty to him and his kingdom. To do this, his mind reverted to that dream and the image he saw. In the dream, the king was shown that there would be many kingdoms that would rise and fall after the Babylonian kingdom came to an end. But King Nebuchadnezzar did not want to believe that there would be an end to his kingdom. No, sir. His kingdom was going to last forever. Therefore, he had an image built that was about 90 feet high, about 9 feet wide. The statue was totally made of gold. How often we do the same in our lives. We think that some business plan or some idea that we have or whatever will be very successful. Folks, only God can make anything successful. We need to trust Him and work only under His direction. Since the head in his dream was made of gold and represented the Babylonian kingdom, and the other kingdoms that followed were represented by inferior metals, the king decided that this image was not going to have any inferior future and would last forever. Therefore, it was made completely out of gold. Then King Nebuchadnezzar summoned the regional authorities, governors, deputy governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all of the other administrators of the provinces, ordering them to come to the dedication of the statue that he had erected. So, the regional authorities, governors, deputy governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all of the other administrators of the provinces assembled to dedicate the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had erected. They took their places around the statue. It is interesting that Daniel wants you to know how important this assembly was. Twice he makes sure you understand that the most important people in the kingdom were there, and that Daniel's 3 friends were called to be there because of their position in the kingdom. Daniel was proud of that. To come from the position of slaves to the position of authority in the kingdom was a great honor to the God of heaven, and Daniel wanted to make sure we understood that. Then a herald proclaimed aloud, "People of all nations and languages, you are commanded, whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, the flute, the lyre, the 4-stringed lyre, and the harp playing together along with various instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that was set up by King Nebuchadnezzar. Anyone who does not fall down and worship is immediately to be thrown into the blazing, fiery furnace." Therefore, when all of the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the flute, the lyre, the 4-stringed lyre, and the harp, playing together along with various other instruments, all the people, nations, and languages began to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay, everything is going along smoothly and King Nebuchadnezzar is well pleased. It appears that everyone in his realm is happy and satisfied, that all the leaders will comply and give their obedience to the nation and the king. At this point in our story, we must go back a bit and remember that after Daniel had interpreted the dream to King Nebuchadnezzar, the king promoted Daniel and his 3 friends to very high positions in his kingdom. Now, that did not set well with the influential Chaldeans. These influential Chaldeans were furious that Daniel and his 3 friends, all of whom were captives from Judea and basically slaves to the Babylonians, were placed in such high authority. Oh, they waited and schemed as to how to destroy them. Now was their chance. They knew the religion of these men forbade them from worshiping any other gods. I can just see them raising their heads up and looking over the vast throng of people to see if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bowing down. They wouldn't be hard to see. Out of the thousands that were bowed down to the ground in worship to the idol, only 3 remained standing. Just then, certain influential Chaldeans took this opportunity to come forward and denounce the Jews. They told King Nebuchadnezzar, "Your Majesty, live forever. You, Your Majesty, issued this decree. Every man who hears the sound of the trumpet, the flute, the lyre, the 4-stringed lyre, and the harp, playing together along with various other instruments, is to fall down and worship the golden statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship is to be thrown into a blazing fiery furnace." Certain influential Jewish men whom you appointed to manage the city of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have neither paid attention to you, Your Majesty, nor serve your gods. And they won't worship the golden statue that you set up. Now keep in mind, the king had put down a revolt in his kingdom, and in his mind, anyone who refused to bow before this image was in revolt against him and his nation. In our day, it would be the same as not saluting the flag or giving your pledge of allegiance to the flag of our country. Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and furiously ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you don't worship my gods, and that you don't worship the golden statue that has been set up? Now if you are ready at this very moment to obey the sound of the trumpet, the flute, the lyre, the 4-stringed lyre, and the harp, and worship the image that I have made, if you do not so worship, you will immediately be cast into the middle of the blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you from my power?" What God? Back then, everything was about what God. It wasn't about nation against nation or people against people. It was, my God is better than your God. My God can wipe out your God. You watch. You will find the same thing in a few years. Nations will rise up against nations, not just for political reasons, but to prove that Allah is more important than your Christian God, or our Buddhist is better than your Allah. And so it goes in our stupidity. Great wars will soon break out upon the earth, pitting God against God. Be prepared. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "It's not necessary for us to respond in this matter. Your Majesty, if it be his will, our God whom we serve can deliver us from the blazing fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from you. But if not, rest assured, Your Majesty, that we won't serve your gods, and we won't worship the golden statue that you have set up." You must notice here how respectful Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were to the king. Even though they would not worship his gods and images, they were commanded by God to give the king all the respect and service that his position required. in our lives, even though we do not bow down to the images and gods of the world, we do honor our God by showing respect, love, and courtesy to those in authority. We always obey the authority that is over us in every matter that does not conflict with God's laws. Oh, this made the king so angry. His face must have turned as red as the furnace blazing in front of him. He was determined to eradicate all rebellion to his kingdom. These three must die as examples of what happens when people disobey. If the king had taken a moment to think about this, he would have realized that these men were probably the most loyal to him. Being obedient to their God showed the greatest character any man could have. Nebuchadnezzar had nothing to fear from them. However, the king allowed his feelings, pride, and ego to get in the way of his intellect. Let us never let our feelings, pride, and ego get in the way of our duties and responsibilities. Nothing but trouble will come when we let our emotions control our actions. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their clothes, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. There, that'll put an end to rebellion in my kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar must have thought. He must have sat down with pleasure and began eating and drinking. But soon his face turned toward the furnace to see the end of 3 conspirators. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. I can just see them as they carefully lifted their robes in order to step over the lip of the furnace, carefully stepping down the stairs that led up to the furnace, making sure their hats were properly set. As they approached the king, the satraps, the prefects, the governor, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Of course, we know that the angel who appeared was Jesus himself. Again, the word angel simply means messenger. Jesus came to give them a message of comfort and reassurance. Then King Nebuchadnezzar made a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. The wicked men who came against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because of their ego, pride, and wounded feelings lost. Not only were the 3 Hebrews saved, but the king promoted them and they became even more powerful in the kingdom. So it is with us. We may be looking at trouble and terrible consequences in our lives if we stand true for God's laws. But if we do, God will intervene and show forth his glory and power in us. Never disobey God. Stand up for the truth and be obedient and do your duty at all times. We find again that the king made another mistake. His first mistake was forcing the conscience of his people to worship his image. The second mistake was forcing the conscience of his people toward the God of the three Hebrews. At no time are we to force. God is a God of love and education, not force. God will defend his own people himself. In our lives, what are we doing with our profession of serving Jesus? What are we doing with the title Christianity that we claim? Are we bowing down to the idols of the world? Are we letting the world dictate to us what we are to do? Do we let our boss determine our worship and obedience of God? Like the three Hebrews, if we will stand up and be counted as worshipers of God in living in exact obedience to his commandments, God will take care of us. It is better to live in obedience and die in this life than to disobey and die eternally. Do we truly believe in a heaven to win and a hell to lose? Is eternal life a reality to us, or only a figment of our imagination that we speculate over and chat about from time to time? If the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is truly real in our lives, then why are we not living as Jesus commands us to live? Why are we putting so much effort to live like the world while we talk as if heaven were our home? As Jesus said, it isn't those who say, Lord, Lord, or I'm a Christian, or I'm saved, who will be saved. It is those who are obedient to every word that comes from the mouth of God. Jesus is our example. Let us follow his example of having nothing to do with this world. Let us work out our salvation with fear and trembling as Jesus did in his life. God bless you as you live in obedience to the laws of God.